Hello, class. So, in today's lecture, we're going to talk about the history of professional selling. Interestingly, as I was doing the research on this, there's not a tremendous amount of information in the academic community, not a lot of real formalized research. It's very loose. There's sporadic information, but it's becoming more common to look at it as a total history because it is evolving to become more professionalized and more structured. So the first occurrence of the term salesman was all the way back in antiquity, in Greek times. So that was the first use of the word. It still hadn't evolved into its own type of profession, but it was referred to as a role, as something that was done. It was done more by the individual merchant that was providing a good or a service as part of their conduction of the business. So it wasn't separated out into its own role. So as you move forward, massive leap forward into the Industrial Revolution, that's when you really started to see development of a profession or an actual job function, a career that was separated into its own thing. So from the years around 1750 to about 1850, during that revolution, industrial revolution, businesses were starting to take hold and be more formalized. You're starting to see more global interaction and companies that had a broader reach than just an individual market. So how do they get their goods out? How did they reach the market? And that's where the first positions started to be developed and the first professional sales roles. So as that continued and you move into the post-industrial revolution, started getting into the late 19th and early 20th century, that's when the first management textbooks and training materials started to refer to the profession as something that was part of the business. Prior to that, during this industrial revolutionary era, a lot of the professional salesmen were independent of the company. They would work on their own and be responsible for their own income, their own livelihood as a separate thing from the business. But as you move into the latter part of the 19th century, early part of the 20th century, companies and firms were becoming to understand that there was a more strategic method that could be used, and marketing strategies started to develop that included how a product or a service was going to be sold to the market. And so they started hiring their own salespeople in-house that worked directly for the company and were compensated and followed a particular plan to conduct business as a professional seller. As technology increases and you start seeing more and more complex products and the markets continue to develop, there becomes the understanding of what they referred to as the old seller, and that was the independent sales agent, and then the new sellers, which were the professional in-house, worked for the company, professional salespeople. And so you start getting to the middle part of the 20th century, around the time of the end of the World War II, and get into more of a post-war era, and there's tremendous economic growth. And that economic growth starts occurring globally as the technology and advancements that were garnered from that war era and from that middle part of the 20th century. Marketing strategies were seeing that professional selling continued to be more developed. And so formalized structure for training, moving from not just a canned sales approach, but into more of a professional structure and a professional focus was starting to take place. And as you moved into the latter part of the 20th century, it continued to develop more professional structure. Technology became a big part of that as marketing strategy starts to segment and understand individual selling markets, individual clients, more stratification amongst the target consumers. So the selling role starts becoming more refined. And now as we're moving into the modern era, the advent of information technology is greatly enhancing the ability of sales professionals. So what you're seeing today is the use of IT technology incorporated in with professional selling that enables them to understand their consumer base. A lot of the advent of CRM tools, customer relationship management, systems such as Salesforce to manage a client base, to manage the relationship between the company and the client, to move more from just selling a product, but to a relationship that's an ongoing business relationship between the client and the company. During that time, or during this time, excuse me, we're also seeing more information used, more of the IT information used to segment the selling roles. Skipping back a little bit to the earlier history, some of the first companies realized that as professional selling was developing, that at some point, managing the account and prospecting for new business and for new clients was starting to be a little bit of a conflict because you didn't have enough time to prospect for new clients and service your existing clients. So as the focus continued to shift to more of a customer based and focusing on that long-term relationship, sales positions got segmented, and it's commonly referred to today as the hunters and the farmers. So the hunters are out securing new relationships, looking for new clients, understanding the market strategy and where they should focus. The farmers are nurturing and maintaining those existing relationships with clients. Modern technology now, as this has continued, there's another stratification that's starting to happen, that you're seeing sales development as a position. And so sales development works very close with marketing strategy to understand where to prospect and how to prospect for those new clients. And they'll gather that information, gather that market information to understand the target market, and then provide that to the account executive or the professional seller, the hunter. The hunter will then prospect what was found by the account development or the sales development, and then once the sales relationship is established, it moves to the account manager. Also, in the modern era, as products are becoming more and more complex, the demands of the customer are becoming much higher on quality. There's evolving much more of a team approach. Early sales was an individual salesperson that delivered a product or a service to an end client, and that was the end of the relationship. You started seeing in the middle part of the 20th century, and it continues today, that a sales exchange and a professional sales exchange involves not only one salesperson, but maybe a specialist. In particular, like in my industry, in telecommunications, you will have the outside salespeople, you'll have an engineer, and possibly another consultant, a specialist in a particular facet or particular product. And that's needed to fully understand the client needs and what solutions should be presented. And so you're seeing a continuation of that shift from product selling to solution selling. And so that it's looking at what is the entire service that's trying to be provided, not just a product, but looking for that balance. And there's also some important concepts. Let me go back to my notes. And continuing with that focus on the customer need, there's also a shifting trend in the industry, and I say industry, and that's part of the point here, is that selling today is not viewed in the same way that you would think of accounting or an attorney or any other professional type role that has an outside sanctioning body that establishes rules for ethics, conduct, and procedures. Sales does have some various professional social type organizations or societies that are fostering more of a professional direction. But in today's structure, there's not a means to enforce ethical rules. And that's where you may see, or may, the public perception of sales is the snake oil salesman, the used car salesman, the shady behaviors, the unethical practices. So the continuing evolution of professional selling is starting to consider, how would we professionalize this? How would we standardize it? And there's some old sayings in the industry that a good salesman can sell anything. That's almost a trend towards that if there is a professional sanctioning body, something similar to the way an accountant would be certified with CPA. What if you had that for sales? You start removing some of that stigma and some of that behavior that's been expected in the industry for all these years, and you move into something that can be trusted by the consumer. I think that's a long way off, but it is something I think is needed in the industry. And it's interesting to note that that was mentioned in some of the research, that the lack of that body still continues to this day. But I hope that gives you a brief history of the history of professional selling. Thanks.